Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts, and we are live on YouTube for Rock M Plus subscribers. And, well, these days it's for all YouTube subscribers. We appreciate that. And I've also got my YouTube video on there, so I'm getting feedback. Now we're clear. All right, so I'm your host, Sam Snelling. It is season 9, and as you can probably tell, the man sitting on the left-hand side of the screen, if you're watching us on YouTube, is not a Matt, is our good friend Blake Lovell from southeastern16.com. Blake, how are you these days?
Hello, Sam. Doing okay. If you'd asked me this a year ago, I'd have been, much more emotion and energy in my voice. But the SEC is not exactly been what it was this time last year. But it's okay. It's all right. It's still playing basketball, still doing okay. But yeah, it's gonna be an interesting conference season, to say the least.
So yeah, I think I pitched this like a few weeks ago. My guess is it was probably when Missouri was coming off the shellacking that they took at the hands of the Kansas Jayhawks. A lot of Missouri fans were looking forward to that game. It did not go well. They just struggled to score the ball. And I was thinking, I've watched a lot of the SEC, play this year, and Missouri has been amongst a group of disappointing basketball teams. Certainly, I don't even know if I'd call them the most disappointing, but they're probably in the top 4. And when you take the league as a whole, and I think we and I were kind of chatting before we went live, but I think a large part of this and the shell shock of watching SEC hoops these days is coming off last year's historical year where everybody was good, and the vibe around the league was like, we've arrived, we've done it, we've got this this cadre of coaches who are all great, up and down the league. Like even teams at the bottom were like pulling off big wins in the non-conference slate. They pretty much ran the table against the ACC. And the ACC, I think everybody would agree, has been down, but to do what they did and not just like run the table, I think if I remember correctly, it was Duke was the only team that won against the SEC, and for all those other wins, they were convincing. Like you had South Carolina, I think, if I again remembering correctly, like was on the road and beat Boston College or something like that, like convincingly, and it was all these like convincing wins and in the ACC SEC Challenge, and then to turn around this year, and we've just watched not just Missouri, and this is a Missouri podcast, so we'll probably talk a little bit more about the Tigers than anybody else, but pretty much the entire league outside of Vanderbilt underachieved relative to preseason expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the difference. Is like last year, it was pretty clear to identify the teams that just flaw was probably too strong a word with some of these teams last year. Like they may have had some things that irked you a little bit, but like they didn't seem like they were like significant flaws on any of these rosters for the teams at the top last year. And it was that group of 4 specifically, the ones that all won whatever 28 plus games. And you even had those teams like Kentucky and A&M and such, and Missouri was one of those that just felt like, all right, they could make a run. Ole Miss made a decent run and all that. Arkansas, of course. And so this year, though, I'm like, I think every single team, right now, you could say, again, I don't want to maybe flaws too strong a word with some of them, but I think so. I think you've got a lot of teams that do have some things that, if you told me for every team in the SEC, convince me as to how they could underachieve to the point to where like they're finishing 9-9 in conference play. There's a lot of teams I could probably get you down to 9 on, and be like, sure, I could see that this year. Even the ones that are at the top right now, I could tell you why maybe they hit 9 wins in conference play. But I just think, I think that's the key difference. And everyone brought up the stats about what is it, 26 of the top 30 scores exited, all that kind of stuff. The SEC, I think, swung and missed on a lot of key transfers in the offseason that wound up at other places and are, potentially thriving at other places right now. And so, yeah, it was that kind of year where I think going in, we should have expected that there was going to be a bit of a drop off. I sound like the pessimistic guy this summer, but I was like, hey, everybody, like, let's make sure we're all on the same page here. Like, this isn't going to be, I don't think, what it was last year. And I was even saying, I'm like, I think 9, 10 NCAA tournament teams probably about right. I mean, as of right now, I think it's 8 or 9, more than 9 or 10. So yeah, I think this is where we're at, and I think there were plenty of signs that this thing was going to take a step back from where it was last season. So
Well, yeah, we were kind of beating the drum that it was going to take a step back as well. But even for my own sake, I figured there would be a step back across the league. I did not quite see it going as poorly as it's gone.
yeah,
And so, like I read some of these numbers to you before we went live. Last year, the league had basically like an 89% win percentage. They were 185 and 23 against the power conference teams. They were 57 and 21, which is 73% win rate. That's pretty good when you're going up against light competition. Now that does
hmm
include the worst of power conference and the best of power conference, but against the AP top 25, Blake, 21 and 8. And you and I, like, we're data guys, so we don't always like go to the AP poll as like a
yeah,
strict signifier of like quality of a basketball team. But it is a fair indicator on how a league is performing against other teams that people think are good. And to go
yeah,
21 and 8 is I mean, like, that's terrific. That's historic. This year, in contrast, uh, the win percentage overall in the league has gone down to 74.4%. They are 145 and 50. These are all before tonight. Most of the slate
right.
tonight is a lot of bye games, so I don't expect anything, but the wins will go up. Against the power conference, though, they're 35 and 46, which is a 43% win rate, and they're 9 and 26 against the AP top 25. Um, on top of that, I also think that the number of blowouts is something that, like, I don't think we were, quite ready to see. So last year, Kentucky lost to Ohio State by 20 points. That was a horrible. They played horrible. It was the only 20-point loss, um, for the entire league, and that was against an Ohio State team that granted wasn't super impressive, but like a one game off. This year it's different. So, so just
Yeah,
sorting. So we have Missouri lost to Kansas by 20. Alabama lost to Arizona State by 21. Mississippi State lost to Kansas State by 21. LSU lost to Texas Tech by 24. A&M lost to Oklahoma State by 24. These are not exactly like the best of the best in the Big 12 here. Purdue beat Auburn by 28. Arizona also beat Auburn by 29. Michigan beat Auburn by 30. Stephen Pearl, little bit of a bumpy start. Gonzaga beat Kentucky by 35, and then to take the cake, Dennis Gates and the Missouri Tigers lost by 43 to Illinois. That is a lot of 20-point drubbings. That doesn't even encompass like all the double-digit losses that do include losses to SMU, NC State, Arizona State. Again, like, these are not exactly like, it's not like losing to Houston or Duke, which there are those losses as well. But that's just like a snapshot of the difference in like the quality of the league. And so like I want to start with on the downside. We're making fun of the league a bit. Who of the 16 teams has, in your opinion, been the most disappointing relative to preseason expectations?
Well, I think we could have said Kentucky until they started to turn it around a bit the last couple games. I think they would have been the easy choice, but I think they proved in the last couple that they can right the ship, and it obviously helps having two potential, all SEC type players at their best in the lineup regularly. So I'm going to count Kentucky out, even though they would have been the easy answer a couple weeks ago. I think for me, it may be Ole Miss, and it's not just because they are necessarily 7-5. I think it's the way they've been 7-5, and we've talked about this on our show. Like Ole Miss is the ultimate like box score team so far this season, in that if you want to know what Chris Beard thinks of his team right now, like he's out there playing guys in the stands, it looks like half the time. Like he is searching for anything that will work. And I think they are clearly in a position. Like, again, you can just go through and you can see how many guys they are playing regularly 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. They're playing everyone on the roster. And, they had the whole press conference, whenever it was, about, he said, look, I can fix who's going to play hard or whatever. And I mean, yeah, you've just had so many guys, I feel like, that have been up and down. Um, I was a big Cameron fan. He's not played well recently. I think he's still going to have to be someone that if they're going to win games in SEC play, he's got to be their best player outside of Malik Dia. I mean, Diaz had his ups and downs. Everyone, it seems like, has had their ups and downs on this roster. And, I can't say I was convinced that they were going to be like a top 5 team or anything. But I think even if you considered they were going to be, let's say, 8-10, I just think it's the way this thing is played out to where I don't really see a team that has answers right now.
Mm.
And so I think Ole Miss has probably been, the most disappointing to me, just based on how it's gotten to this point, not necessarily just record-wise, but how they've gotten here. And I will just say, I mean, I think, second answer for me, it's, I mean, I think Kentucky's probably still in the running, but I think you got to eliminate them a little bit. I
Well,
just because I
they're
think they're
still probably going to finish like what,
yeah,
probably top 6 once they get into the
yes,
league at worst. I think
that's it.
probably still a top 4 finish is very likely there.
Yeah, so I keep wanting to put them in there, but I don't think I can at this point. I mean, and the only other one to me, it is Missouri. Like they're the other one. Because like I can't say I'm shocked that Mississippi State's where they're at right now. But like with Missouri, even for a 10-3 team, you shouldn't be losing the way they're losing to Illinois. You shouldn't be going into, I think, conference play with virtually nothing to work with on your resume. And I think it's the frustrating aspect of like you're seeing some of those just really frustrating things come back in, from a couple of years ago. And yeah, I think that's probably it. And I hate to say it, we had a strange discussion when we were comparing SEC schedules a while back, and someone asked us the question. They're like, "Who's going to be the Arkansas this year?" They're like, "Give us a team that could be Arkansas." And we're like, "What do you mean?" Well, a team that could start 0-5 and make the Sweet 16. And I was thinking, well, as I'm looking through all these schedules, Missouri's a great candidate because they do not have a great start in SEC play. And of course, this was 2 months
Yeah.
ago, and we didn't know exactly what teams were going to look like, right? But I'm looking at it now, and I'm like even more sold on the idea that this thing, it may not get much prettier, just based on maybe what I see right now, but we'll find out. So yeah, I think Ole Miss would be 1, Missouri would be 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, both Mississippi schools. I almost joked, like I didn't really like what Jans had built. I mean, Josh Hubbard is fantastic, fun guy to watch, but the rest of the roster left a lot to be desired. But I think I almost jokingly put them at 8-10, just
Right.
because Mississippi State's finished 8-10.
Yeah.
Uh, but I didn't really foresee them being as bad as they've been. So for anybody who's not followed along, Mississippi State started the year top 30 in KenPom. They've fallen all the way to 87. Um, they did just beat Memphis. Sort of saved that one. They narrowly beat Long Island University the other night, and then they did beat Utah, who's not a very good Utah team. Losses: San Francisco, SMU, New Mexico, Kansas State, Iowa State. Iowa State, losing by 16 early in the season. Okay, Iowa State's great. Losing the way that you did, Kansas State, and then turning around the next night and losing to New Mexico is not great. Uh, I, I agree with you on but I also didn't really like what Beard had kind of built. But he's also a guy. It's just like, how do you not trust Chris Beard at this point to figure it out, and get wins, and they look like along with a lot of teams like a bottom bottom four potentially. I was watching, Oklahoma was struggling early with Mississippi State, or Mississippi Valley State, sorry, earlier on tonight. I'm sure that'll turn around at some point. Um, but it seems like everybody in that group has sunk significantly from their preseason rankings. Missouri started out to kind of keep hammering on the Tigers a little bit. They started out preseason inside the top 30. uh, Fell all the way to 38. We shouldn't discount their now top 100 win over Minnesota. The Golden Gophers have snuck inside the top 100 there at 99. But Dennis Gates continued to schedule very softly, and then they let one get away from them at Notre Dame. They looked completely unprepared against Kansas, and then Illinois, I think, was a combination of things. Going from Illinois shot the ball great, Missouri shot the ball horrible, but they also really outplayed the Tigers. And I, going into conference play with nothing on your resume as far as an NCAA tournament is concerned is really concerning. If you're a Missouri team who thought going into the season that you were gonna kind of make back-to-back NCAA tournaments for the first time since like Mike Anderson and Frank Haith were roaming the sidelines. So I think I agree with you on those. There been anybody like let's skip over Vanderbilt. Anybody outside of Vandy who you've really been impressed by?
Boy, that's a tough question. Um, really impressed. I think I would throw Arkansas in there to a degree, because I think the tendency has been they're just going to start slow. Um, but I think when you consider the full body of work, a 3-point road loss at Michigan State in game two, where, a couple of your freshmen look like freshmen in the closing stretch. If you played that game 3 games later, they probably win. They got a little more experience under their belt, but that's a tough game too. I mean, Duke, they're up, what, 9-10 with 10 minutes to go or something like that in that game. Looked really good. Brazil was playing well. Um, Wind up losing, but like you just got Cam Boozer. A lot of people are going to get Cam Boozer this year.
Yeah.
So no real shame in that. Then they get 2 huge wins against Louisville and Texas Tech. It didn't look great against Houston, of course, but at the same time, I mean, Houston is Houston, and
Yeah.
I think every SEC team would struggle against Houston. I know Tennessee beat them, but I think, in a setting like that, I think it would be a struggle for pretty much everyone in the SEC. So I think Arkansas has put it together faster than I thought they would, just because, again, that seemingly has been the norm for them. Um, so, yeah, I think I would say that Arkansas has probably been the team that's impressed me the most. And a lot of that just has to do with, I think, again, in this era where it's like we're so enamored with the transfers that sometimes you forget there are freshmen who can just completely be like what Darius Acuff has been. I know Malik Thomas has had a few up and downs, but still they're going to win more games than they lose because of him in SEC play. Um, So I think I would probably put them in that category, like you said, if you're not picking just a slam dunk candidate in Vanderbilt. I think Arkansas is probably number one. I can also say that like I didn't expect Georgia to be however they're the third fastest team in America right now and scoring 100 and something. They're the team I would say I'm still hesitating on them, and everyone knows like Georgia fans are like, please, just what are you doing? Like, just tell us we're great. And I'm like, I want to, but I also see a team that has 10 of its 11 wins, in the quad three, quad four range, and I know they're putting up a lot of points, and all that, but and we've kind of compared it. Like, I think Georgia is who a lot of people try to convince me Vanderbilt is, and that is a team that like has nothing on their resume to this point substantial, and so I'm still in a little bit of wait and see mode with them. Um, but like I think Arkansas has been the most impressive of the group, and outside of maybe Georgia and LSU that have been somewhat surprising record wise, I still
Hmm.
think there's a lot to be determined on both of those versus Arkansas. I think is an SEC title contender.
I think, yeah, I agree with you on Georgia and LSU in particular. There are a lot of empty calories on there. They're basically at this point not too dissimilar from Missouri, just without having to play,
Yeah,
uh, you know, Kansas and Illinois. Um, and like, not taking away anything, like you play the games that are on your schedule. Georgia has, they've beaten everybody pretty soundly, who they played. They did, play Clemson to an overtime loss. But they turn around, and I realize like this game, that all the games that are happening tonight, they struggled with LIU a little bit. Um, and these games are kind of like you're coming off break. You never know like how
yeah.
your team's going to play. Some teams show up and play great. Other teams show up and don't play well. I do think that at least the way that they're playing, though, lets me believe that Georgia's a team that is at least set themselves up to be an NCAA tournament, discussion level team. Now, whether that ends up being like squeaking in 8-9 or like a legitimate like 6 seed, I don't know. Let's see how they play the first two games. They get Auburn and Florida.
Yeah.
Um, but so what's your take here on Stephen Pearl? Auburn, 8-4 doesn't look that bad considering their schedule. None of their losses are bad losses. They're all to very good teams, but they've been uncompetitive against Michigan, Arizona, and Purdue. Um, they beat St. John's. They beat NC State. A lot of teams have beaten St. John's this year.
Say two
So
underachieving teams. We're going to be honest, like those two
yeah,
teams have been underachieving. Yeah,
yeah. But basically non-competitive against the cream of college basketball. And Michigan, who's first, Arizona second, Purdue's fifth. Um, so are they a team that's going to hit SEC play and settle in a bit and still make the NCAA tournament? What are your thoughts there?
so on our show this morning, we had to come up with bold predictions, and somehow I got myself to Auburn finishing in the top three in the SEC as a bold prediction.
Oh,
Okay, but
whoa.
I'm going to tell you why. It's not because I necessarily think it's going to happen. It's because when you look at their schedule, that game on Saturday at Georgia, let's say they go in and win that game. You look at the next little stretch for them: home against A&M, home against Arkansas, at Missouri, home against South Carolina, at Ole Miss. Like, it's not unrealistic to think that they could be 6-0 to start league play with that kind of schedule. Um, because it's drastically different than what they've faced so far over the past month. And it's easier. Like, it's just an easier schedule than they played. So I think there is a possibility. Again, Saturday's going to tell us a lot about both those teams. I think that might be the most fascinating game on Saturday to me. Um, but like, if we do want to play the what if game, like I think their defensive numbers, have not been good. But then I look at it, and I'm like, man, you know what? I think there's a lot of SEC teams that if they played, those teams in particular, Michigan, Arizona, and Purdue, if however many teams played that trio, I think that pretty much every other SEC team's defensive numbers would be a little bit further down than they are right now. Um, so
Especially,
I don't want to just
yeah.
knock them completely. But like you said, it is glaring that they lost all three of those the way they did, and that's why we've knocked them a bit when we've talked about Auburn. And I think some people feel like we're being a little unfair, but we're not. And we could again play the hypothetical of, well, all the other SEC teams could lose like that. Well, that's not true because we've seen SEC teams play these other ones, and it hasn't been that lopsided.
Hmm.
So Auburn's kind of a probably one of the teams that I just don't have a great feel on. But I do think this early part of their schedule over the next 3 weeks is going to tell us a lot because they do have the talent, I think, to be maybe 6-0 if they can win on Saturday. Um, because I just, Todd Pettiford, Keyshawn Hall, that's why, like, I did my column for Basket Under Review, and I was trying to pick my first team all SEC, and there were times where I was convincing myself on Hall, and then I would talk myself out of it because of his defensive numbers. But ultimately, I said, hey, right now, I think he has to be right there when you look at the numbers. And I know even Matt and I kind of, had some back and forth about him in the summer. But still, I mean, I think you just look at the production for this guy, and I think he's good enough to put them in a position where they're going to win some games. And
Hmm.
so I don't know. Like I think it's probably more the supporting cast. How does everyone continue to kind of fit into their role? It feels like they're one of those teams that's really been trying to figure that out so far, and it's not easy to figure that out when you're playing this brutal schedule. So I don't know. I think Auburn, maybe of these teams, let's say in the top half, they might have the widest range of possibilities to me, just because I think again, are they a team that's 28 plus points worse than some of the top teams in the country, or are they a team that's going to kind of again maybe feast on a manageable SEC schedule at least early on, and really even I think late that they've got a pretty manageable schedule. Um, I think that's what I'm curious about with them.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why you and I both do the game by game pick 'em in the
Mm-hmm.
preseason is knowing the SEC is going to have an unbalanced schedule is going to change the outlook for
Yep.
a lot of teams. And one of those reasons why it's how tiebreakers work. Like
Yep.
I think I had both Missouri and Alabama at 10-8. When I did my picks, and you know what, Missouri went to Tuscaloosa, and I had them losing that game, and so that means that Alabama gets the higher seed, and that's just sort of like so much of that is how the breakdowns work, and then you also like you know you look at, okay, they've got at Florida, at Kentucky, home against Tennessee, like all three in a row, and this is just hypothetical, but like, and then you look up and people are wondering like why a team is struggling to win games. It's like, well, like they played three of the toughest teams that you can play in the league, and did two of those on the road. Like it's hard to win games when the other teams are also trying to win. Um, so I'm curious to like Auburn's definitely one of those teams where I'm really interested to see how they hit league play. They are only separated by 4 spots from LSU. Matt McMahon, went with the Dennis Gates approach of not scheduling anybody, loading up on some experienced transfers, and it's kind of worked. They're 11-1. They've played really well. They started the year, just inside top 60 in Ken Palm, and they've crept all the way to 41st. And I think they've put themselves in at least contention for a bubble discussion. Um, they don't really have a lot of meat on the bones of their schedule. They do have uh, a road win against Boston College, which I don't know. You hope maybe that stays in the quad two range.
Yeah.
Um, and then SMU is a semi home that'll go down as a neutral. Um, SMU that'll probably end up staying quad one because they'll probably stay in the top 50. So one quad one, if you can, get yourself to 9-9 or maybe even 10 wins in league play, then I think you're probably feeling safe. At least on the end. And right now, Ken Palm has them projected to go 9-9.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference this year is I think the bare minimum for pretty much everybody's 9-9. It's I think we're gone are the days of 6-12 and 8-10. I think especially this year it's going to be hard. I think at 8-10, unless it's one of these top teams that even then I think that's dicey. Um, just depends on who
It all
you're.
depends like what the 10 losses are, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's the combination. Yeah.
yeah.
So I this is probably gonna. I would think this is probably the first year we're getting an 8-10 is about as hard as it's been in several years at the very least. But I think with LSU, obviously losing Jalen Reed, I think hurts long term. Um, just because I think, man, you need a guy like that in SEC play. I feel like, but I say that and I'm like, well, it's nice to have a pair of 6'10" guys. But then you look at what like Mike Nwoko's doing, and I mean, he's been pretty good. So it's just a matter of I think staying out of foul trouble and those kind of things. But I think if there is going to be anything maybe that holds them back a little bit, it's maybe some defensive lapses if they get that front court in foul trouble a little bit. Something like that potentially, in SEC play, because we know fouls and free throws are always going to come into play in this league. But I think what they do have is like Denton Thomas. I could absolutely make an argument that he should be a first team All SEC guy. Um, maybe you're not going to put him ahead of an Acuff or Gillespie or Tyler Tanner or Duke Miles right now, but I mean, still, I think he's probably a guy that's still flying under the radar. But yet, when he signed with LSU, we were like, okay, now we're talking. Like this may be the difference this year for LSU, and so I think seeing as well as he's played so far, whether it's Nwoko, whether it's Markel Sutton, Max McKinnon, like all of these guys have stepped up at like different times for them. So I am probably more optimistic about LSU than I expected to be at this point. But I don't know. Like again, though, it's like they don't have a lot to go on just yet, and we've seen them play one elite team, and it did not go well against Texas Tech. But I thought for them to bounce back a week later, get the SMU win, that told me a little bit more probably about them. But I do worry a little bit that the Jalen Reed injury is going to be the thing that if they were to miss the NCAA tournament, I think it's probably we're going to look back and say, yeah, they just didn't have enough maybe depth in the front court without him. And maybe that just kind of impacted their ability to really do some things that was enough to get a resume worth actually making the tournament with.
Uh, and I also kind of want to talk a little bit about Texas. I do think that we were, and by we, I mean not me specifically, but a lot of people were maybe a little overexcited about Sean Miller in year one in Austin. And it's been kind of a rough go. They're 9-4. The record doesn't sound that bad. All their losses are semi-respectable. You don't love the Arizona State loss on a neutral, but losing to Virginia, the way that they lost at home isn't great. No one's going to complain about losing to UConn or Duke, but they've really only got like NC State on the resume as far as being a quality win, and it's certainly looking like the Longhorns have a tough road up if they're hoping to make the NCAA tournament.
And one of the reasons is their SEC schedule. And this was one where, like, again, we didn't know how teams were how it was gonna unfold to this point, but like we looked at their schedule a couple months ago and we're like, they've got one of the hardest schedules in SEC play, which could be a good thing because they need something to work with. Again, outside of the NC State game, they just got way too many 300 plus type wins that are just doing nothing for them at this point. So maybe having a tough schedule is a good thing. I'm not convinced of that though because you got to win at some point. And when you look at their schedule, they should win on Saturday against Mississippi State at home. But then I'm like here are their road games coming up after that: at Tennessee, at Alabama, and then they got their home game against Vanderbilt, at Kentucky, at Auburn, at Oklahoma, who I think could be kind of a sleeper team potentially. Got to go to Missouri. Who knows where they're at by Valentine's Day? At Georgia, at Arkansas, their road games are brutal. They probably got the toughest road schedule I would think in the SEC, and so that's where again, if we're trying to claw our way to 9-9, it's not to mention well, you got some tough home games too. You're playing, some of these teams that I don't know. Like I think Texas is one where I think they're going to get better, but I'm not convinced they're going to necessarily get to that level. I feel like they're going to be the ultimate bubble team. If I had to pick one team where it's like, what team are we sweating the most entering like Selection Sunday? I'm going to guess it's Texas right now because I feel like they're just kind of built that way where they do some good things, do some things well, but I feel like there's enough things that can hold them back to where it's going to be a very up and down SEC slate. And but like it's funny because these are the teams to me: Georgia, LSU, Texas, like Missouri. Like these are the teams that are going to swing the SEC from having maybe 10 at most to like possibly 8. I don't think it's any lower than 8. Could be, depends on what kind of chaos happens, but these are to me are like the teams that are going to decide it all. Whether they beat up on each other, they can't find enough quality wins to kind of claw their way back into the bubble picture or whatever. Georgia's on the upper side of that, but still, there's a lot of work to be done for all these teams.
So while we're kind of talking about this, I'm going to share Bart Torvik's Tournicast,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is always a handy tool. Kind of gives you an idea um, of what everything kind of looks like. I'll size this so we can kind of get a little larger there. Um, so most likely scenario is the graph at the bottom. So this is chance for uh, 9 teams making it. We're about a 40% chance. 8 is about a 29% chance, and 10 is a 19.34% chance. And then if you're looking for any kind of column, like this is essentially what you're looking for in your odds. So not looking great for Missouri, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and as far as their in percentage, Oklahoma at just 23.5%. And then I'm actually kind of curious. So it was just announced that Mackenzie Mbako at Texas A&M is out for the season with foot injury. They're at a 33% chance. To me, like that injury alone probably drops them.
That's way too high.
Yeah, down probably closer to OU.
Yeah.
And if you actually if you consider A&M, what their schedule has been, they took some pretty rough losses. Oklahoma State, UCF, SMU. Their best win is over Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
Pitt is not very good. They did blow out Florida State. It does seem like teams that handle pressure and like the more experienced, more talented upper echelon power conference teams uh, can handle pressure. Those kinds of teams are probably going to have a lot fewer issues, dealing with Bucky ball. I'm still like a believer that Bucky can McMillan can kind of get things going, but I'm not really sure that resume is something that's screaming to me like that looks like a tournament team, especially with Mbako now having to sit out.
Yeah, I looked at that one. That was the first one that I was like, I think that's just too high. And I said Vanderbilt and A&M were like my two sleepers this summer, and one of those has been okay so far. I just think A&M's just not. I don't know. I think they're going to be too kind of up and down. How many times have I said that? Like, just pick a team at this point. I just feel like anyone in this range is going to be right there. I would actually probably like Oklahoma more than I would A&M or Texas right now. Um, and a lot of that may be based on the schedule. So I'd probably swap Oklahoma and A&M if I was kind of maybe the expectation. And again, I think the issue I have is like I am nowhere near as sold as the analytics that LSU and Georgia are going to pan out to that percentage. Um, and maybe that's just me being pessimistic, but I need to see more. I just don't look their resumes right now. Just outside of good performances, don't support for me that high of a percentage. But I understand how it works. So
Well, yeah, I mean, it does amount to like if you are beating
Yeah.
bad teams and you are beating them thoroughly enough, then it's going to help your rating.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing if you're hopeful as a fan of one of those programs is that there's enough where the rest of the league has looked poor enough to
Right. Yeah.
to like maybe we aren't the world beaters, but we've been more consistent. And I think like a good example is Missouri. Missouri, the hope kind of coming in, and as this is a Tigers podcast, we'll kind of stop and talk Tigers a little bit. But the hope kind of coming in was that they had an all league four in Mark Mitchell coming back. They had an all league defensive player in Anthony Robinson, who at times looked like he was, could become an all league player at guard. And then they also had Trent Pierce, who hasn't played, who started more than half the games. Uh, and then you look at like the development of guys that were namely Trent Pierce, and Ant Robinson, but also guys who are in their second year with the program last year, like Caleb Grill and Tamar Bates, guys who took kind of like another step as players. And you're like, all right, like I can buy in that guys that maybe we didn't see much from last year are going to be ready to kind of take another step forward because of that development program. And then Missouri just hasn't had any of that develop. Jacob Cruz has sort of stepped up as being, a legitimate outside shooting threat. He's looked as like a guy who's maybe taking that second year leap. But Honor Boateng is a guy who I think Missouri fans thought could take that second year leap. Tio Barrett. I think there was some hope that Trent Burns might be able to shoulder some minutes at the five, and instead we've been saddled with like big lineups that can't shoot. And it seems really kind of antithetical to the kinds of teams that Gates has fielded up until this year.
Yeah, I think you said the word to me, and it's just development. Like I think that's been the most disappointing thing is, we're having conversations in the summer about just the depth, and we're like, all right, man, you're picking one of the deepest teams in the SEC. That guy could play. They're going to play this, and we knew like in non-conference play, like it's going to be, they're going to play a lot of guys just because it's what they always do. Like they're going to play a bunch of guys and see how it fits and all that. But yeah, like you're just not seeing guys take that step like we thought they were going to. Like I was talking up T.O. Barrett. I don't remember how much like this summer, and it's just like hadn't been there. And then the Boateng thing, you factor in injuries, like it's just been it's been very disappointing. Like there's no other way to put it. Like I just think it's again, if you'd have said, hey, they're 10-3, I'd have been like, okay, well, that doesn't sound that bad on the surface. But I think it's just when you watch them play and you realize that like that gap between what it felt like with last year, where it's like, all right, well, come on, there's a clear difference from where we were the season before to where we are now. Like, I'm not saying they're going to go all the way back to where they were a couple seasons ago, but it feels like a sizable gap between even like the good of last year to where they are right now. And again, it's like you don't want to see that if you're trying to kind of change the trajectory of the program in a consistent way. Like there just hasn't been the consistency, and I think that's where again, what are the things as that frustrated fans even when they were winning at times. Like there have still been frustrations with you know, defensive stuff, the shooting, rebounding. Like these are just kind of things where they're always going to have size. But I'm sure we could say some of the same things about Leonard Hamilton's teams at Florida State. Like they were always one of the tallest teams out there, but there were some things that Florida State fans would probably tell you that's frustrating to no end that seemed to be common themes throughout the years and felt like, well, maybe that holds us back here, holds us back there. And, and I know like the way Gates has said it and all of this just about, yeah, I mean, the injuries matter, but at the same time, like, I just, it, you feel like it can't look like this heading into what I said. It's just going to be a situation where I don't know that it gets that much better. At least early on, I don't think the schedule's there to feel great about them. Let's say come February, being in a position to make the tournament. I just, as of right now, like I just, I know Torvik had it what 4%. I can't disagree with that at all. Like I think it's a very long shot right now. Just based on what I've seen to this point, maybe they get guys back and it changes, but yeah, that confidence level has gone down a bit in terms of just maybe them being able to get this team where it needs to be.
Yeah, and I think, even if there are healthier guys, um, Jaden Stone was making much larger impact than I think a lot of people thought,
Yeah.
uh, before the season. Trent Pierce, obviously being out, does hurt them, but I don't know that those two guys into the lineup uh, are going to make you overcome what you saw the rest of the way against both Kansas, and Illinois. Maybe that's enough to get you the win in South Bend,
Yeah.
but I don't think this is what you envisioned like Missouri, kind of being, um, when you're kind of going into the year, because like they went from 2 years ago to a team that never shot free throws to being one of the nation's leader in free throw shooting. They stacked a team with guys who aren't maybe great shooters, but are good at attacking the rim, and they aren't shooting anywhere near as many free throws as they did a year ago. Um, they don't they don't turn people over like they used to. They aren't
Hmm.
playing with the same sort of high pressure defense as they used to. So yeah, like I and so there's somebody asked if there's uh, Dennis Gates is going to get fired in season. No, he's not. Um, I think the rest of the season would have to be pretty disastrous for Missouri to turn their back on Dennis Gates, especially considering the amount that they've invested in the recruiting class, going into next year, and the number of like young talented players that he's kind of been bringing in. I think even if this year ends up as like a non NCAA tournament season, I think we're probably still looking at Dennis Gates at least getting another year, but kind of needing one to turn it around, and to show some level of consistency. So right now, if you had to make the case for Missouri making the tournament, you're saying you can't make that case.
Right now, I just can't. I don't know. I don't know where I would like even begin. It sounds very unlike me when it comes to my guy and Dennis Gates. And I know, trust me, that anytime, Sam, people get a chance to, when Missouri's down, don't worry. My Twitter mentions and everywhere, they remind me that somehow they knew from day one that it was going to, and it's kind of funny how that works. But I also am like, yeah, like I get it, guys. Like I can tell you right now, you should be frustrated. Like I think you should be unhappy with kind of where things are to this point in the season. I'm not going to sit here and act like that. Oh yeah, this is where they were, a couple years ago, and it's not. Like I think it is disappointing, and I just, I guess if you want to try to make a case, it's simply, well, let's get some guys back and see if that added element again with Stone, who's been better than people thought he would be. The impact has certainly been there. Maybe that makes a difference, but um, it just I think it's the unknowns, like with the defensive element, and like you said, it's just like the identity is sort of flipped a little bit, and I don't know if there's kind of that next gear that they're going to need to pull off some of these wins this year. But at the same time, I guess you could say it kind of ties into where we started the conversation. Everybody in the SEC has got something you could pick on a little bit, and so that may be what saves Missouri from again having. If they don't make the tournament, it's going to be disappointing. But maybe they can get enough wins to be right there, like in the conversation at least going into the end of February, something like that. I just feel like that's probably the ceiling right now based on what I've seen. Um, but again, it's just I don't know because there's so many unknowns with these SEC teams outside of Missouri that there will be someone that surprises probably all of us. There will be probably one or more disappointing teams right now that are at the top that all of a sudden tumble backwards. But I just, yeah, roster wise, you feel like Missouri, you should be able to make a harder case, but I can't right now, Sam. Like, I just don't have that optimism just based on recent results. So,
Yeah. Well, and I do think that, the hope for Missouri fans is that the rest of the league is down, and there is
yeah,
enough on the Tigers roster that they should be able to figure out something that works. Like Mark Mitchell is still Mark Mitchell. He's been great. Ant Robinson, if he can be consistent, Cruz can be consistent. And they get Stone back, then I think there's enough there that they can make a push. I don't know if they can make a push for the NCAA tournament, but I think I really have a hard time imagining this is going to be what happened 2 years ago. I just think like there's way more talented on this roster, and I think that the last couple games have been hard enough lessons that I'm hoping that the staff can kind of learn that there are things that you can't kind of get away with.
yeah.
So, with all that said, we've kind of gone over time. We're going to get out of here. Blake, if are you a gambling man? I know that you guys do some gambling advertising on Southeastern
You know,
16. You place bets?
we have some fun with our friends over at FanDuel. I would say, yeah, I may be known a time or two to throw a few dollars down.
All right. How many of these teams are you taking to make the NCAA tournament if you're getting even odds? Are you going nine? You're going to go 10?
I can't go 10. I'd go 9.
You go
I'd
nine.
go 8 before I
So
went 10.
so Vanderbilt, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky are yes.
Those would all be yeses. I think Auburn would be a yes.
That's 7. So
I'll
that
say Georgia
leaves
would be a yes right now.
that's 8. Stopping
I
there.
probably because
All right.
I don't have the trust
You
in
heard
anyone
Blake.
else
Put
right
your
now.
money on Georgia and make the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I if and look, it would probably be like, who am I choosing between Georgia and LSU right now? I'd pick Georgia. Um,
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
so
A
I
little
think,
bit,
yeah,
deeper roster. They've got, more athleticism, deeper front line. I'd
yeah,
probably feel okay with that.
yeah.
All
Mm.
right. Well, before we get out of here, go ahead and tell everybody where they can kind of find your stuff.
Yeah, if you want to hear more of my Missouri pessimism, you can find us over at Southeastern 16. I really don't talk that bad about Missouri, but you can tell I'm a little down when it comes to the Tigers right now. Hopefully it turns around, but yeah, you can check out our daily SEC basketball live shows. We'll have our predictions for every Saturday game coming up as well on the channel. So yeah, Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Find us there.
You guys do a great job over there, and it's always great catching up with you, Blake. You know that I love what you guys do, and I appreciate your taking the time to kind of hop on and make fun of this league for I guess being Icarus and getting too close to the sun, and now they've fallen back down to the reality. Long season ahead. We'll keep it positive. A lot of things can still happen. So I look forward to discussing this, and hopefully the Tigers can rebound and look like the team we all kind of hope they would be. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week to talk about what happened against Florida. Nothing like opening up against the defending champion Gators. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a good night.